Okay, so up to this point, we've been talking about responsive web design in general terms, so it's time to get specific. We want to discuss the three components of responsive web design here. And we're going to take a look at these in order, and then we'll dive in a little deeper for each one. So first, the three components are fluid grids, flexible media, and media queries. So we're going to go ahead and start with fluid grids. Grids have been used in graphic and web design for quite a while. They help us keep structure within our layout. They provide a system rather than just putting objects on the page randomly. And the point of a grid is to help you line things up and to maintain order. Now the fluid part comes from the fact that this grid expands and contracts based on the size of the browser window, and the layout will also change. So to see this in effect, let's take a look at bostonglobe.com. This is a responsive website. It's got a fluid grid. You can see here as I begin to change the width of the browser window, you'll see the columns begin to contract. And at some point they go from 3 to 2 to 1. The content changes. And if we contrast this with boston.com, which is a fixed width website, when I change the width of the window here, nothing changes. The second component is flexible media. So the problem with fluid grids is what to do with that static content, such as the images inside. If you don't do anything else, images will tend to break within a fluid grid and they don't scale naturally. But with flexible media, we can take content such as images or video and we can stretch them based on the size of the screen. The last component to take a look at is media queries. Media queries are a CSS3 component that allows designers and developers to target specific characteristics of different devices or screens. What are some of these characteristics? Well, we've got screen width and height. We also have things such as pixel density or device orientation, which means we can know whether a tablet or smartphone is in portrait or landscape view. Once these things are targeted, we can provide CSS that applies to our page only under those circumstances. So to illustrate that in more depth, let's imagine here that these four devices all get some CSS that's the same. So for example, on the widest desktop, maybe we want 4 columns, or maybe we want 3 as it gets smaller. If we decide to change the navigation for any of these sizes, we can do that. They all come from one central location, which is an external style sheet. So you put all these together and you get something like this, the Boston Globe website. Now we just took a look at this earlier, but what I want you to do is to pay attention to some of the things we just talked about. I want you to pay attention to how the grid changes and how the media or images change, as well as the navigation. So as we reduce the width, we go from 3 columns to 2, 2 to 1, and then that one column goes to a more condensed version of the single column. But also pay attention to the navigation. So that navigation has gone from multiple choices in the menu bar to just 2 in the single column view. And we have access to these multiple navigation items through these sections. So this puts it all together. Let's just take a closer look at each of these three elements in turn, and we'll start with fluid grids. So as we saw there, fluid grids flex and they fit content within the device, but the HTML always remains the same. It's the CSS doing the work. There are numerous examples of how to use grids to your advantage. We're going to take a look at these in an upcoming lesson where we talk about grid layout more specifically. Let's take a quick look at flexible media. The good news is creating flexible images, as we saw in that last example, is relatively easy from a CSS perspective. We can add a simple rule called max width 100% to our images. And what this will do is allow the image to stretch depending on the size of the container. However, this is a little deceptive. Even though this is relatively easy to do, there's a lot of issues we have to consider when we're using flexible images. One of these has to do with bandwidth, and specifically how long an image takes to download. We can create these larger images for websites and they look great on the desktop, but we're actually penalizing mobile users or those with slower internet connections. So this is actually one of the major challenges of responsive web design. How do we give users only the images that they need? In fact, there's an entire group out there called the Responsive Images Community Group, and they're trying to figure some of this out. One of the strategies they're exploring is an entirely new element called the picture element. I'm going to leave you to explore this on your own if you wish. It's worth your time, and we'll be looking at it more in depth in the responsive images lesson. Now, the challenge of working with responsive images isn't just about performance or bandwidth, it's also about content. or more specifically, how you can control the editorial content, things such as cropping. It'd be really nice on a desktop site to have a big, large image that stretches the width of the screen, but then cropped for a smaller mobile phone. Now last, let's take a look at media queries. One of the terms you're going to be used to working with quite a bit is breakpoints. So here we have an illustration of a single column layout, and the question is, what happens when we begin to stretch the width of the browser screen and that layout begins to break? Well, what we want to do is change it to a 2-column layout. But at what point do we do that? So to illustrate that more clearly, let's go take a look at an example at the worldwildlife.org site, which is a beautiful responsive site. We'll start out here with the smallest layout, which is 400 pixel wide, perfect for smartphones. As I begin to expand it, we'll see the next breakpoint right about here. So this is 640 pixels wide. Now we stretch it a little further, and we hit the next breakpoint here, and this is 770 pixels wide. Notice the completely different layout between this one and the last. And then finally, we'll go to the final layout, which is 1,000 pixels wide, and this is essentially the default desktop layout for larger screens. Ultimately, the takeaway here is that media queries aren't just about handling layout for screen sizes, big or small. They're really about tailoring the user's experience based on their device or screen capability. Okay, you made it to the end. Let's talk a little bit about what you need to do. The first homework assignment is a short quiz located on the Gymnasium site. Quizzes are designed to help you retain the information that you learned in this lesson and to help reinforce the concepts as well. The second assignment is the following. Locate 3 portfolio sites you've never visited before. You can go online and do this fairly easily by doing a search for CSS portfolio sites or Web Designer portfolio sites. Once you go to the sites, I'd like you to click on at least 3 links. So navigate the site, go ahead, visit those 3 same sites on a smartphone. When you do that, I want you to take note of what your expectations were. What happened when you went to the site? Was it what you expected? Was it not? And why? All of these things are going to help you begin thinking about your own portfolio page when we get to that point. Keep in mind that we're available here on the forum. I hope to see you there, and I also hope to see you in the next session.